Thuile or something.
Uh,
La,
is
La
it
Twelve.
La Thuile? La
La
Thuile.
Thuile. La Thuile is the one. Okay, it wasn't.
Yeah.
I
La
think I was
Twelve.
saying it
Yeah.
in my head. I was saying it like La Thule every single time.
Yeah, you're just like a roof rack the whole
Yeah.
year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely not was not good. But that course was, I think, absolutely phenomenal. I think for in terms of a downhill course, like lots of line choices, steep. Uh, it was in great condition at the start of the weekend. Like you saw all the loam and everything like that. And then as the weekend went, it sort of got a little bit blown out and dry, but was still like fairly decent from what we could tell. But I guess like, what did you guys think? What were the general thoughts? Like Reese, if you want to start.
Yeah, I thought it was a classic example of careful what you wish for from the riders, where they were all like, "We need more tech, we need more steep stuff," and then it probably was so fun to ride for like a day, and then it became this treacherous race course. Which I think, to be fair, none of them did complain after, which is awesome. But it looked hard, like it looked really hard to race, and it looked super physically demanding, and because of the conditions, I thought there was a lot of line options, but maybe it ended up that there was like one obvious main line, and it was like how you rode it within that a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah, I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, I think like that one to me looked like the most fun one to ride of all the courses so far. I mean, and just the excitement of a new track is always fun. And I think it looked like that kind of like shaly kind of dirt that is always moving and it gets rough and holy, but it doesn't like get like sort of notchy, which I think is pretty fun to ride. I have ridden there before, and it is that hillside where it is so steep. So I can only imagine it was way steeper in person.
So what do you think for like, we're talking about Jackson's sort of impact. Like obviously he's dominant again, which I think is an insanely hard thing to do in downhill mountain biking. And he's making it exciting every single time. But what's he doing out there? I guess that what tactics is he taking that then how is he changing the other riders' approach to the course?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot because I've had weeks to do it now, which is awesome. But if I was going to summarize it in like 3 words, it would be consistent precision. Not even 2 words, consistent precision. But I wanted to say like precise precision because it's that sharp, where he's doing things that are really hard to do at a high speed on really gnarly terrain, but he's got like these super narrow braking windows, and mostly it's the activeness, right? He's being so active on his bike and hitting these doubles that are saving him those fractions of a second. And the pros and cons of that is the pros is obviously that you're going to go faster. It looks super cool and that's rad. The cons is like if you're in the air, there's nothing you can do once you're in the air to like control your speed or control your bike. So he's having to be that sharp that if you're not touching the ground a lot, you're not able to make a lot of changes. Whereas I think the more traditional approach, and what I love about it, to answer your question, is I think his ability to now be this precise, this consistently, is showing that you can do it. And it's one of those like ignition moments for the sport where it's like, well, traditionally you'd have like sections of that in a course, but you look at someone like Loic or Loris or previously dominant people, they were attached to the ground a lot. They were very, very good at being the fastest at 97%, and Loic can ride at 97% 10 out of 10 times and be one of the fastest people on earth. But now he's getting pushed to have to be at like 99, 100%. And you saw that. There's a clip of Loic jumping a double that I think only one of the juniors jumped. And it was that big one up the top, and Jackson didn't do it. But it just showed me that mental approach from Loic, which was like, he's very typically like risk averse. He's only going to do lines he can do consistently. And he like tagged it and like kind of swapped. You could see in his run, he was pushing quite hard, and Loris's run as well. So I think the impact of Jackson doing that is making these other riders have to look for answers, because it's now 4 back-to-back, and they're going, well, I got to do something. I can't just keep doing what I'm doing. So they
So
put that extra bit harder.
So if I'm hearing this right, it's like, now it's becoming a sport of maybe pushing it into that like 99% every single time. You can't just show up at that like, the comfortable 90% like Loic was doing for years and sort of dominating. You have to like show up every single day and potentially hit that 100% without giving it, okay, let's call it, I'm using a lot of numbers here, but if we went like 105, that's what the juniors are doing. Like every once in a while, you see a junior come out and they just like, throw down an absolute heater, but then like the next race they blow up. I think that's like still going to be a little bit outside of the comfort zone. Like Ross, what do you think about like where's the limit here?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'd love to know like where Jackson would rate where he's at on his scale, but like I always kind of remind myself it's not linear. Like you can put an 80% sort of intensity effort in, and that's not 80% speed. So he might still be able to operate at like 95% and just doing the stuff he is doing, and that just happens to be ridiculously fast. I just think I think we're now kind of in a bit more of an era in the men's field, at least, where it's all about gaps. Like, it's almost lily padding your way down the trail, and that, like Reese says, that does come with a risk. And you saw that he did crack a rim, and had he been maybe Reese's weight or my weight, maybe that was like a DNF. So I think in one of the previous chats we've had, Reese was saying how like he has been taking risks, and sometimes those margins are so tight that it can lead to glory or it can lead to a DNF. So I think we can put it down to it was amazing, but he also was pretty fortunate to not have like all his air just go, because after he did that move, I believe he pulled a gap that I think on one of the analysis that Ben Cathro did, it bought him, I think, like 0.6 of a second, because he was able to gap off this rock into a backside that really gave him speed for a falling section. So yeah, it's cool though. Like it's exciting. Like I'm loving the way that like they have to push and they're doing it with slightly different styles, and it's rad.
This the sort of cracked rim drama that came out of this at the end of the entire thing, is that just drama, or is this like really like something that we should go, holy shit, like this is kind of crazy to watch somebody win with a cracked rim and a flat tire?
Now, I don't think it's drama that it didn't change his run at all. I don't think, like he had a little bit of his tire, but there's just as much argument that a softer tire for the front half of that track could have been good anyway, so obviously there's a point of diminishing returns there, but I don't think it's as much that as it's like Ross put it, holy shit, he was this close, like a tiny bit of extra weight or a tiny bit of extra grab on that root or rock, and that was a last place and not a first place. So it just shows you the margin he's on, right? Like it's so thin to be doing that for physical aspects, equipment aspects, especially. Like he's pushing it for sure to the limit.
Yeah, and just having like that little bit, like, but the equipment's also doing what it's supposed to, right? Like if the rims crack a little bit, if like there's a bit of a flat, it's supposed to everything's made to sort of like to fix itself a little bit, unless you have those catastrophic moments where everything blows up completely. But testament to the wheels, to the tires and the equipment that's out there now.
Shout out to the reserve wheels. There you go.
So one thing is if I show the video, it gets really choppy. And so what I am doing is I'm kind of like overlaying a video, just so you guys know. I am overlaying a video, and like it was just like looping with Jackson. And I will try to show you guys videos that I want to share. But I think for most of it here, I'll just have to we'll just be talking, and then I'll be like kind of showing relevant clips in the background, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Have you used Discord before? This can be done later.
What's that?
You used Discord before?
Yeah.
I wonder, we do because we do our editing, like when my editor lives in WA, so we have to do live editing stuff. I wonder if maybe we try one of those for the meeting instead of Google Meet, if that would help the video recording or not on your end. But
yeah, we could absolutely try that next time. I think it's probably quicker. Is it like, does it have like stream options on it?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Well, anyways, it was just a thought while we were cruising through streaming stuff. But
Yeah. Well, okay. So one thing. What else? What do we have here, Reese? What are we rolling through? You got a couple more notes. Let's hear it.
well, I wanted to ask Ross, what do you think if you had to pick one skill from our beautiful skills pyramid? Skill do you
Yeah.
think is the most made the biggest impact for riders on this track?
I feel like it kind of depends on the sections of trail. Like I was noticing a lot of, like, to me there was a little bit of a difference, and it got me thinking of like riders who have a more forward bias and riders who have a more rearward bias, and how the difference that they look when they're in like the sort of off camber sections or turning. Like for instance, like the rearward bias riders like Ronan Dunn or like Nina Hoffman was like doing that to great success this week, where so active in the lower body to be steering. I guess you could term it steering with the rear in terms of having the bike move. And to be fair, I feel like Loeb does a little bit of this. Like he just hunkers down, uses his big strong legs, and kind of guides the bike through that. Whereas I feel like some of the more forward bias ones, because they've got a bit more weight on the front wheel, when they don't have to make those movements as much to have the bike respond. So like I definitely saw quite a lot of that. But I think obviously there were some pretty hefty like brake moments. I think there was one sort of bit before one of the road crossings where they really had to get on the brakes quite heavily, and just kind of seeing the riders that were able to do that effectively by driving into the bike to try and get more pressure for braking. So like combination of pressure and braking.
I was wondering if
Good.
this specific clip actually applies. Like, so I have one here that's like Jackson and Loris as they're coming over like this roll, and you can let me know if you think that like the sort of specific like pressure on braking, and also bias, like whether it's forward or backwards, um, is a little bit choppy, but
Let's Yeah, I think interesting because they're both relatively forward bias riders. I think you can see that Loris definitely swung it out there a bit and lost the traction. Yeah, I think in terms of that, I would agree with you, Ross. I just saw the breaking points throughout the week go from this size to this size to this size, so they had to break so precisely and heavily in really loose terrain. So I think in terms of that, I totally agree. That ability to add pressure to be able to do that was amazing. In terms of the comparison there, Jackson just shows you again, he kept it so smooth, where Laura stepped out a bit. He maintained that extra rolling speed. Was he out of there quicker? Looks like it a little bit. Hey,
it's hard to tell in this exact clip like who was first, and who was the quickest. But Loris definitely sent it a little bit deeper. But then they definitely got into the hole that was kind of lower down. This one was like I'd love to honestly put a comparison together and just like one after the other of like the top 10 riders and like how they hit this section, because they're coming down like fully weightless into this like compression. When they compress, it's like that's like where they obviously we want to be braking and they're going to be able to create the most traction. And then like depending on how much speed they're able to scrub, they're going to be smoother through that right hand turn. um, but then Ross, even to your point a
I
little bit,
think
like
that
with lily padding is kind of like the thing almost. It's like they're like hopping around, and that's where you're getting your brake traction.
Yeah, I think like when you air into something, if there was a set of scales on the ground, for example, the figure that would come up would be vastly higher than how much you weigh. So I think some of the best riders, even in free ride, they're able to maximize that braking traction in those pressure. And I think there was definitely several moments like that But sometimes you can overdo it. Like I think there was one section lower down in the course that looked really quite awkward, where it was quite a squared step into a 90-degree right hander, and you could tell some riders as they came into that compression zone, they would get hung up. And I think partly it's because as they were on the brakes had more effect than maybe they were hoping, and their body would sort of like almost overtake the bike momentarily. Um, Versus if you were, actually a little bit less braking power in that moment because of that pressure, you're kind of doing more with less in terms of your braking in that situation. It's definitely something I've been working on my own riding, is like not necessarily like almost like using the rear to slow down more in those situations, because it has less of an impact on my body mass versus if I'm, usually use front brake a lot in a straight line to slow down. But if you add a component, sometimes you need more energy, your body, like I said, overtakes the bike a little bit. And then you have to brace against that more, and it compromises your cornering or managing going over a roller net.
Yeah, and similarly, I think with what you're talking about was with fatigue, right? If your front brake has more power available to you, the margin for overusing it is again a lot tighter. So, we were talking about that a lot with our athletes these last couple of weeks in the IXS Cup, where there was one that Aprica track was super physical. Everyone was like, my hands by the end, and I was like, okay, in that bottom section, like more gentle on the front brake, like more consistent pressure through your back brake will just allow you to, when you're fatigued, you're not as precise. So if you make that mistake, it's not going to cost you big. It'll cost you less. So just focus more on managing that back brake throughout. So as much as a precision strategy, it's also a physical like strength management strategy. At the end of it, sometimes you're just like, hey, let's salvage some error here and just nurse the back a bit.
Yeah, I feel like it was pretty evident that Nina Hoffman did an unreal job of that in the women's. Like she was actually definitely using a lot more rearward bias in her position, and must have been making more use of her back brake in those compressions to do that without compromising potentially upper body fatigue. And I think in the interview after, she said that in practice runs she was getting tired at the bottom, but for some reason she didn't in the finals. And I don't know if that was a shift in her positioning on the bike, or maybe like sometimes you just have more energy on any given day. Like athletes go through waves of feeling in better condition, on any given day. So maybe that was part of it. I'm sure there was a bunch of scenarios that came into play, but that was pretty impressive. I know that I'm not conditioned enough to ride the way she did. My legs would give way.
So, Ross, do you think that for Nina, it was like an adjustment that she made on the day, or is this just the way that she rides all the time?
I think she generally rides a little bit that way. So it's hard to tell. I mean, only her and maybe her team and like PD would kind of know whether they've kind of talked about that. But she's clearly works super hard in the gym and does a lot of physical work to be able to use those legs that way. Again, similarly, Loic's very good with that. Armory's very good with that. So, but you can't ride that way unless you're really physically conditioned. So most
Right.
amateurs will suffer big time from that, and I put myself in that category because I don't train for that stuff.
You're like a forearm dominant guy, not a leg dominant guy.
Yeah, but then my hands, the thing I suffer from is hand cramps when I ride, especially gripping too tight. But it might be because I'm like not able to support my mass through my legs the way I need to. So amateur life.
Well, to some degree, watching Nina, when I watched her win, I was like, she's just following Jackson around the course, and that's why that's kind of what I was thinking. I was just like, oh, she's gonna be following Jackson around, like he's telling her all the lines. She's on the same team, but in the video here, I just have showing in the background. It's like
No,
just
they
Nina's
ride
running.
very different.
Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah. It's all just it's it's all for the headline, right? It's talking about Jackson. Um,
Yeah.
we
But it's the bike. It's the bike. Makes me say that.
It's the bike, 100%. That's what
Yeah,
led to a
yeah,
crisp 25th in an
That's
ISS Cup
yeah,
week. But I was the
that
yeah.
oldest. I was the oldest category, so that's pretty good.
that's the
Um,
sale. That's the sales pitch. What's going on with the juniors, Reese? They're riding.
it's
They're
sick.
riding really well, and
They
I don't
are. They're
have
right.
I don't have any clips of the juniors here, but the juniors are riding exceptionally well. And what the top three would have been in the top five of the elite, I think.
And that's been reasonably consistent. They were talking about how Asa was so disappointed he didn't win the last race, and it was he got third in junior, but he would have got top 5 in elite, which would have been like a mega win. So it was disappointment in junior, but would have been top 5 in elite. And I mean, there's a few things to unpack on this. I think the long story short of this is it's that ignition thing, right? They've seen it. They've seen Jackson do it. They've now seen a few heroes. I do think we're coming to a peak in terms of long-term athlete development, which is juniors now have had access to really good equipment, really good terrain, coaching, the internet for now like at least 10 years. So the period of time they've been able to have like really amazing, good quality practice on the right equipment, on the right terrain is now they've probably got those 10,000 hours under their belt, right? Whereas previously, Jackson was kind of the first. Jackson and Finn are the ones that we know about in Canada. There's probably Loris and Flauwek are the French versions, but like those were the first generation that had mountain biking as it is now, more or less, for their whole development. So I think this is the first iteration of that generation who've had their full upbringing in the modern era of mountain biking, I suppose,
Right.
because like when I started doing it, I was on a 24-inch wheel in the back, hardtail with a double crown sending off wood drops. So mountain biking now is not what it was when I started doing it. So they're practicing in the right setting for the right amount of time. I think that's just this is the summary of that experience. I don't
If you have
know
any
what.
clips, Reese, if you have any clips of yourself with that on that specific bike, I'd love to cut it in here. Um, but yeah, like we're definitely seeing like, you know, and then using Gracie as an example, like she grew up riding on her family's uh, downhill course, like on her family's like downhill, like, you know, they literally built Coast Gravity Park, and so that's where she's grown up riding, and like, you know, these kids are like immersed in it like other pro sports. Um, for the juniors, you know, big hopes for Asa this year, and are we seeing him deliver? And the other juniors are just doing, you know, like meeting him at that level and then delivering further, or like, are we seeing him underperform? What do you guys think, Ross?
I mean, I think this is arguably the deepest field in the junior category ever. You know, there's been riders like, you know, Jackson, and back in the day, Sam Hill. He was one of those generational talents who would contest the elite level times, even when they. I mean, back in the day when Hill was racing, they didn't have a junior category, but now, I mean, next year when these guys all move up, it's going to be even gnarlier because I mean, when Jackson and Jordan Williams were in juniors, those two were posting times that were challenging the elites, and now we've got like 3 or 4 of them, actually more when you got the Kiwis in there as well. It's pretty wild. So, I mean, I think I couldn't agree more with what Reese is saying. I think it's just it's the product of the environment and the opportunities available to all these riders, and coupled with that, then it's really just about how competitive each of these individuals are to push themselves, and we're seeing the cream rising to the top. But yeah, there's never been an era with more highly skilled riders, and also with like they're developing smart racing skills earlier as well. You know, they're on professional teams. They've got coaches helping guide them. Like Reese has got some young lads, and they're learning how to try and compete at these races. And you know, there's so many local races, even locally here in Whistler with the kids racing. There's kids who will, by the time they get to 16, they will have done like probably over 50 races in their life. So yeah, the opportunities are incredible.
Yeah.
Shout out to programs like GSNBC and Zep Racing and
Yeah.
Apogee. Reese, what do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a big Zep Racing advocate as well as I started that team, whatever, 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
The other thing I think within that is like specifically why they're doing so well race on race is I think it's their ability to be confident getting up to speed so quickly. Like it's kind of that they've had that background like we talked about, but as well they're in that youthful state of mind, and it's kind of the first time we've seen juniors not have this like I'm a junior and I'm going to throw everything at it and have a big crash and have like one good result, bad result. Like Ross said, they're racing very maturely, and they're all able to get up to speed so quickly that they're learning tracks really fast. They're really smart, and then they're genuinely playing and having fun at World Cup pace. So that then it's like virtuous cycle of I would be shitting myself if I was one of those elite riders because they're scrubbing and doing whip going at a pace that's like a top 5, top 10 elite pace. So they know these tracks so well. They've seen them for so long. Or sorry, they know tracks like these so well that even when they get to a new one, like La Thuile, they're getting up to pace in like 2 or 3 laps and practicing at that pace. And I think that with the Q1, Q2 thing is going to be increasingly important moving forward for them as well. So when they move to elite, I think it's going to be scary times for a lot of them.
Yeah, I'd be curious to kind of piggyback of what you're saying there, Reese. Is like they're riding free. I wonder. I would hazard a guess that the Alren twins and for sure Asa probably already have long-term contracts, or at least know that their elite future in a factory team is secure, because that's the one thing. So they probably can ride more free, knowing that if they crash and don't get results, that they've still got a ride for next year. Because I think that's the kind of potential hazard of for juniors right now is if they don't impress a factory team through their junior career, then they're privateer, and trying to be a privateer in the modern era of downhill is going to become harder and harder. So I would hazard a guess that those guys probably have contracts. I don't know, but it'd be interesting to know that.
I know Asa's signed his. They made a big Instagram thing about it that he signed for 3 years. So he's next 2 years will be, or first 3 years of elite will be with Frameworks. I'm sure you're right. Like there's no doubt people will be locking it down with the way the points work as well. But it's interesting. I almost want to like rebut that a little bit, because it's like they're riding free, but they're sometimes riding stupid. Like not stupid to what the rest of the world, but like you don't need to be like completely backwards sideways over a scrub roller in your practice runs, but you're doing it for a photo because Sven sat there with his camera. But like that's what I love about it too. Is like you should be doing that when you're junior, but that's also why I think it's so sick and scary, is because like good scary. It's because they're doing that repeatedly, confidently, consistently, race on race on race, and they're there's that risk of a crash, but they seem to be very comfortable to be getting so loose, and like just looking at the way they're moving on a bike at that speed it's so impressive. And yeah, their ability to be comfortable in that speed at that pace is next level.
The one thing I would say about juniors, at least that I sort of observe across the sport and then other sports as well, is like you could, if you were a good enough junior, you would just start racing senior. Whereas like all the juniors now, they're just, they're not racing in elite. They're not on the broadcast. And they all know this. And so I think that there's almost a little more emphasis on like this. They can explore, and like at a lower consequence, they don't have to perform. They're not in the spotlight, except for on their social media. So they're like trying to make these, they're trying to make the sick post before like the edit like leading into the weekend, and like that's probably a lot more valuable than the actual result for them at this moment, right? And then that'll obviously flip at some point. But even Jackson, Jackson's got 500,000 followers on Instagram, or like he's one of the biggest social media presences, and that's also important too. So at least at least we know we'll have this very social media, marketing centric, sort of heavy crowd that comes up, and I think it's going to be a good thing for the downhill and mountain biking in general.
Yeah, 100%. It'd be also cool if there was a feeder system for them to just get there based on their merit and not their social media presence.
Yeah. There was one. There's one thing on the one podcast I was listening. It was like, I think it was on what's the Downtime podcast, and Nico was on it, and he was talking about how ASO is just like, he's like, oh yeah, like he was like trying to like figure out a line or something like that, and then he was like, okay, I'm done with that. Now can you just get a sick video of me like transferring into like the wall ride? like that's what they're doing on the course. It's like, oh man. But you know, it looks cool and they get a lot of views, and that makes them happy. And I think with juniors, honestly, it's like nice that the level is kind of brought down. It's not quite as serious, but they're still like able to like explore and like figure things out, and like you know, you don't want them to wreck themselves and like ruin their careers, because you know we all know that can happen in downhill, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. I just could waffle on about junior racing forever, but it's also so sick that they're, you know, like there's less emphasis on it. There's less resources. They're not getting put on camera as much, but they're putting down the fastest times of the day still. Canadian series, US series, New Zealand series, Aussie series, IXS Cup, European series has now all been consistent. U17s are starting to beat the juniors. The juniors are beating the elites. And right now that funnel is full of insane talent. So what we have coming up is these, I guess the point is these five, you know, like the Alran brothers, Tyler Waite, Ollie Clark, John T. Williamson, that junior category is not a they're not a random set of outliers. Like the whole funnel is full, and the next 5 to 10 years of downhill is going to be psycho, and it's going to be awesome because yeah, we've seen it everywhere.
It's gonna be so sick. Well, to speak of like different eras here, Jackson, 4 wins in a row. He's the first rider in the men's category to do that since Aaron Gwynn. And like, I'm going to ask you guys a little bit of history here. I want to see if you know your history about Aaron Gwynn's. We did the series, so I got all the stats and everything like that. Aaron Gwynn had 4 finishes, 4 wins in a row. It was Val di Sole, Fort William, Mont Saint Anne, and Wyndham. Could you guys name any of the other podium finishers in those races? And it doesn't like there's a few, but there's a couple of like repeat offenders.
Greg Menard.
Rat Boy's in there. Greg Menard's in there.
Greg Menard's in there. What was the other series?
Rat Boy, Josh Bryceland.
No.
I
don't unless no.
So who's in that?
So we got in Val di Sole was Gwynn.
Val Simmons.
So in Val di Sole we got Gwynn beating Menard and Atherton.
Oh gee.
And then the next one was Fort William, and he beat Danny Hart and G. Atherton in that order. And then
2000.
I think it was 2012 or 2012. I think was the year that he did the 4 in a row. The other, so in Mont Saint Anne, Menard and Hart were the 2, and then Gwynn, Smith and Atherton and Wyndham. So who's Smith?
Stevie Smith.
2013, no, 2012, 2015. Anyway, there you go. There's your history for the day. With the margins though, the first win that Gwynn had in Val di Sole was 7.8 seconds. So he won by 7.8 seconds in Val di Sole. That was his first win of that 4P. Then looking at like Jackson's wins here, he had a 1.5 second margin in the first win. He won by 0.059 seconds in Leo Gang, which is like one of the closest margins, like in basically downhill ever. And then Val di Sole was a pretty convincing one with 2.4, and then the Thuile was 0.6. So, but still all convincing. Like, and I think that the other thing too with him is like when I'm watching his races, it's like he's like right on it, and it's like barely kind of edging ahead, and I think that's like super exciting. You know, it's great to watch.
I think in the modern era, that deficit in Val di Sol is like a whooping, like 2.7 seconds. You say that's a
It's a
taking
true
the
whooping.
time that's a whooping. Yeah, in this modern era, that's beat down.
Big
That's a beat
time.
down.
And there's so many factors that have grown since 2012, right? Like you can argue that now everyone's on comparable equipment, comparable amounts of support. Whereas I think there was a fair bit of like rogue shit going on back then, where it's like if you were a privateer versus a elite level team person, there was a pretty big gap in what was available to you. Like people were still racing in jeans back then.
Yeah. Oh man. Jeans are still
Yeah.
fashionable. I still wear them on a bike once in a while.
I'm not mad.
Functional too. Okay. Anything else? Do you guys have anything else you want to talk about, or is I have a couple? I have one other thing that I wanted to go through, but
I mean, I'm still on. I mean, I don't know if this is to add to this one, but maybe it's for a future one. Like, I'm still fascinated by the concept of personality and how that shows up in riding. And I don't know who might know the Allrun brothers, but they're twins, but they're not identical twins, and they ride differently. And I'd like to know if they're different personality wise, because that just fascinates me that you can have people who clearly grew up together, would have had obviously the same opportunities, like in terms and the same amount of riding, no doubt, but they ride differently and they go about it a little bit differently, and it's just fascinating to me.
it's
And they took different lines.
nature
The one bit
versus
that had probably the biggest line difference,
Yeah.
and they took literally the opposite lines and it ended up being about the same time on the clock. Like it was negligible, the gap, but I think it's cool. Like, and I almost want to pose a question: if they were identical twins, would they ride the same?
Yeah, that's interesting. The
nature
other one,
versus nurture.
well, that's it. But I guess the nurtures, yeah, that's it. The other example that is the Meyer Smith Aussie boys, like Remy and Luke. They're brothers, but they grew up living together, but they're polar opposites. Like Remy is ultra mega chill. He's off season is surfing and hanging out with his buddies and like getting barreled in Indo, and then he flies back to get on his bike like a month before the season starts. And then Luke is like every ounce of his food is calculated and his training is super dialed. I don't know if that's true, but he's super serious and very dialed in with all his stuff. But Luke's so far had some really good results, but they both ride as good as each other. Like they're both at the elite highest level, and I think that's the cool thing about downhills. There's not just one way to do it. So you can still be like Dan Booker, who surfs and cross trains on the surfboard, also trains hard as well. But so cool that there's different styles that can produce that same result on the bike.
But I wonder, like, even just like the twin factor, like I can't off the top of my head think of actual twins in elite level sport. So it's like, to me, it's a fascinating, almost like case study of how things are going to go in the next couple of years.
The Sedin twins, hockey, the Canucks.
Yeah, but yeah, that's different. But yeah, I mean, the closest thing I think in like elite in the men's currently is the Lawrence brothers in moto, like Jet and Hunter. But they're brothers; they're not twins.
Right.
But yeah, anyway, I'm fascinated by, like, as coaches, how much influence or does personality play in performance? or aptitude for working on stuff, being detail oriented, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah, it is a
And
good question.
So I feel like that's like a bigger topic.
well, and the lines you could draw from that, which are not, we know that's like not a zero-sum game, where if you got the right coaching methodology or environment or team for a particular personality type, that might get them their best result versus this personality and what sort of nurture they need and environment they need to perform at their best. And you probably would find some correlations between like some pretty hyper-focused, intense people. But I do wonder that, you know, we know there's many ways to learn, and if what you would get based on that, because you've seen that tons with, you know, separating the twins and brothers situation, but riders who leave a team where they maybe struggled because it just wasn't a good fit, and then they get on this team and have like blow up seasons and career seasons when they get to a new environment. It's such an important part of this performance process, and I think that's going to be a big part of the future of the sport as well, or already is. Like, you can hear people talking about it, which is like team managers are effectively acting as coaches to create that environment and make sure that fit, and they're picking riders based on that, not just on purely their bike riding skills. Like, if they're going to be a good fit for the team, is this going to create the right environment for everyone to succeed and perform their best as well? So it's definitely a big factor.
All right, I've got an ender for you guys here, and you guys tell me if you can hear this. If you can't hear it, then I don't know if we're gonna be able to do it. But tell me, can you hear this?
I can't hear anything now.
It's just
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
How could we do this? I'm trying to think how we could do this.
Play it off your phone into the speaker.
Yeah, that would be high quality.
Discord can do this. I do know that.
It does. Like it'll just take the back audio.
It will, yeah, because that's how we edit stuff. Is like will be sound and everything.
Okay,
I suppose the question we could ask is, do you guys think that since Gwynn's 4-peat back to Jackson's, is this like the first since those two, is this the first like game-changing moment where the sport's like taking a big jump, or do you think there was anything in between those two? Because it seems to me that
I think.
Sorry, go. I
feel like Omri went on a bit of a tear a couple of seasons back before he had a couple of his injuries, where it was like, wow, this guy is like dominating them. And through that time, obviously, Bruni's been like unreal, and he's been super consistent, and especially at World Champs. But yeah, other than Omri, like I forget who. Maybe did Omri win like maybe 5 in one season, but it was like 2, 1, 2, or it just wasn't in a row. Have to double check that. But.
Yeah, true. No, that's a good point. I just wondered if it was like those 4-peats were aligned with these kind of shifts in the sport, where like Gwyn certainly pushed it, like that G and Gwyn zone, where that was, I think, like it was G, Gwyn. I'd have to look back at the stats. Obviously, Minar always trained, but I think that was the true death of the like I can drink beers till 3 a.m. and still win a downhill World Cup. That era sort of died. We moved into this professional version of the sport, and now that, I don't know, I feel like that middle era between this last 10 years, 12 years was like huge amounts of equipment development, where this era was like, okay, the riders are all training, they're all at a really high level, they're all pretty fit, they're all really good, but equipment in the last 10 years has dramatically changed. And now that we've had, like, you're still getting some electronics and some other stuff, but like those guys have had it for like 3 or 4 years now, this electronic suspension, and bikes have been at the pointy end now where most teams, most riders have mechanics, they have like really good equipment. So maybe now this is the next the next big end of an era where it was like, hey, you're gonna have to be. There's no more 90% effort race runs anymore. You're gonna have
Yeah,
to
and
be on the edge from
it's
now
all
on.
it's like all business, and it's very serious. And like I think that it's not just the riding and the results that show that, but I think across downhill as a whole, like you have Warner Bros. Discovery coming in and like buying the rights to stream this thing, and like you go to a downhill World Cup and the production value is quite high. The bike industry is enormous in terms of actual dollars that they're moving, like selling bikes and like along with everything else, coaching and that sort of stuff. And this is a huge advertising platform, and so whether or not it's like this era is like this big modernization, commercialization of these riders and their presence, and whether that be on this stream on social media as faces of these brands. And that's why I think that we're seeing a lot of the riders that are younger starting earlier and being treated more like development might have been treated in hockey, call it like in the 90s. Now we're seeing that in Canada, sorry. hockey in Canada in the 90s. And then what we're seeing is it's these like development funnels all the way up, and then talent acquisition, like, and then those sorts of things. Like that's really, and it's good for the sport. But then to speak, I think, to like Jackson specifically, and then also like some of the other, like you look at Nico Bulio, he was the first one to actually care about how his bike was set up, right? And then you go like to the next, like to Sam Hill, and he's like got this like super dynamic like style of riding, and like he kind of comes in. Greg Menard is the most conditioned guy, so there's these people who bring these different aspects, and it really does feel like everyone's putting it all together. But I think if there's one thing that from sport, or that we've see consistently across sport, is that athletes, teams, and companies that work with these teams, they always find ways to innovate. And so we're saying now it's like they have it all, but in 20 years they're going to have something that we didn't even think of yet. So super exciting time, super cool time to see Jackson and like what he's doing. I think it's like he's at the start of an era that he could define, but we haven't seen it yet, and it's still to come. And it's a super exciting time for downhill riding.
Hugely. And that's the beauty of what you just said there, right? Is that one thing changes, and this is just like riding. Like you go faster, and now you need to be better at braking. All these things they're not fixed, and now that they're riding a certain way, they're going to start training physically different, and then the equipment is going to change, and bike setups are going to change, because now everyone wants to be gapping everything on the trail instead of being like planted was the whole thing everyone was chasing from their suspension until now, right? Now everyone's like, get rid of it. I want to be jumping. And every mechanic's like, what the fuck? I've been working my ass off this thing planted for you, and now you want to jump over everything. So it's going to be super funny. I think it's so sick to see the cycle, and that it isn't fixed. It's always going to be changing.
What do we have as predictions for Andorra here? It's a flatter track. It's really high speed. What are we thinking? Who do we have on the podium here for the men's and the women's?
I feel like, I feel like it's not a complex track. It's just who can turn their brain off, really, and somewhat risk it. I think that's why guys like Lloyd sometimes don't like these kind of tracks, because there's less separation. I noticed in qualifying, the fastest in the elite was that Colombian dude. He definitely looks like he's not scared. So I don't know but like I think, yeah, it's hard to say, right? Like I think the usual crew are going to be up there, but I think there could be the odd surprise in the top 5 maybe, or top 10, where I think each round has seemed to have like they've established like 3 amongst the top 5, but there's been maybe in like last week was it like Henry Kiefer, or like someone who's less of a known sort of top 5 rider. So maybe this week it could be that Colombian guy.
I think some of the bigger guys have a shot too.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, less stuff to gap on this one, I think. So we'll see.
There's quite a few though. There's quite a few snipery little gaps on here as well. I just wonder that it's going to be so blown out too. Yeah, I would love. I would almost pick like a a person who's consistently up there, and then like a sleeper that you think would be doing well. Like I feel like if I was going to pick I really have been loving Antoine Piron's riding. Like I think he's just due for one, and he's a bit of an underdog in the brother shadow and everything. Like I think he could bust out a magic result at any moment. Same with Ryan Pinkerton. I don't know. He hasn't been getting enough credit either. He's always in the Q1, always making it through, and everyone's just like talking about when Dak's going to come back. But he's been absolutely smashing it. Like he's just under the radar, top 10ing, top 20ing all the time.
My prediction is going to be Loris. I think he's been looking very arrow these days, and I think the high speeds are going to benefit his ride style.
Fair. Yeah. And similarly, I think he's been pushing a bit. He's got a great mustache, so he's probably
Yes, right. It's not the only one.
I think last year at Worlds, Loic was up at the splits, but then crashed big time. And then the year before got skunked by like I think like the last 10 or whatever were screwed by the rain. So, but he qualified fastest. So
Loic's got
and
redemption.
Loic lives in Spain, I believe, or Andorra. So it's kind of like a home race for him. So
home race for Loic. Yeah, he's an Andorra guy. But don't they all just move to Andorra because it's tax free or something like that?
tax haven, yeah.
Tax haven, yeah.
Red Bull money for tax
And then
haven.
on the women's side, I'm taking Tawny. I think after this
Right.
the Aura farming post, after the Aura farming post we saw I think she's got good vibes going into the weekend, and that she's that she's gonna win. What do you guys think for women's side? Any thoughts there?
I think Cami Belange could pull off a sick one here. I really also think Gracie could bust out another really good result. I think she's been consistent. Like again, you're gonna compare yourself to your last result, so she's probably disappointed. But from previous, like if you look at last season, injuries and all this hard stuff, she's now she won one, got the confidence, and now is like on the podium in the top 5. So I think she could win at any moment.
Yeah, I think for me, you can kind of throw a bit of a blanket over those top 5 girls. They're all in great form, and it wouldn't surprise me if they're in any of the positions in the top 5. So it's really exciting.
Yeah.
Love to see it.
Is Millie Johnson? I think she had a really good time training, but she's due. She's been hauling, but I saw a few clips on her Instagram, and she just like really lets it hang out there. Like she goes for it, and it's pretty sick. So if that could come together for her, that would be pretty sweet. Like I think one of her quali runs in La Thuile, she like crashed and then like hit the net on like the next section or a section further down, and she's just even after a crash still absolutely